been searching for the best way to generate passive income in your life and heard that real estate is a great way to do it. But you're tired of all the so-called gurus who are all talk and no substance. Get ready to celebrate because Kevin Buck has spent 14 years successfully making it happen. This is the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Now, here's Kevin Buck.
Hey guys, Kevin Buck here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income-producing real estate investments. And our guest for this week's show is a mobile home park investment expert, Mike Conlon. Now, Mike is the CEO and majority owner of Affordable Communities Group, which is based in Cary, North Carolina. Affordable Communities Group currently owns 45 manufactured housing communities totaling 6,100 plus spaces throughout 9 states with a market value exceeding $400 million. And it's been a number of years since I've had Mike on the show, been a number of years since I've even seen his pretty face. And so I'm excited to have him back here today. And Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, Kevin. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, we were just kind of reminiscing of back when I was just getting into this space. I was up in North Carolina. I can't remember if we had just bought a property up there or what, but you were nice enough and kind enough to meet me for breakfast one morning just to chat about the business. You'd been in it for a number of years already, kind of a veteran at that point in time already, and now you've been in it for I don't know how many years total have you been in this space, Mike?
This is our 16th year in the MH space. So.
In the MH space, that kind of is a veteran.
Yes.
you have a ton of new blood that's coming over the past decade, and not many can say that I've been in it for 10 plus years. But you're there, and you've been doing it for a long time, and have grown a significant size portfolio. And so excited to really not just dive into a little bit of your background for those that aren't familiar with you, Mike, but also find out what's new. What's transpired over the last couple of years in your business. But again, before we get there, just for those that aren't familiar with you, they don't know your story, don't know anything about you, maybe take a few minutes and tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you got into the space.
Yeah. So, I've done multiple things as we've talked about before. And, I was in financial planning business for a number of years, did pretty well with that, but sort of got tired about it. And then I read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad back in 2001, and that sort of changed my thinking and everything. And we decided to go from financial planning to real estate. And because Rich Dad talked about apartments, that's all we really knew. We were in Wisconsin at the time. And so we got involved and we bought a couple small apartments. The first one was a little 8-unit, just to see if we liked it and stuff like that. And then after about a year, we really liked it. So we decided to move to Orlando, where, it was booming at that point in time. Not a lot was happening in Wisconsin as today. Not a whole lot's changed. So going to Florida in 2002, we got into the apartment business, owned, I think, 7 or 8 communities at the peak, about 500 spaces, 500 units, obviously in the apartment talk, and really liked that. But in 2005, I read an article somewhere that said, hey, mobile home parks, a lot easier to manage, better cash flow. And Chris Berry, who is my operations guy to this day, said, hey, let's give this a try. So we bought a small 80-space park down in Polk County in Florida, and basically in Lakeland, and it was 80 spaces on about 5 acres, and it was jammed together. But he really liked it from a management standpoint. And the difference obviously between the apartments and mobile home parks is that you have a lot less turnover if you treat your residents right on the mobile home park side, which means a lot more money. So that's where we started in 2005. We bought our first park, got out of the apartment business shortly after that. And we actually had to 1031 a bunch of money because we sold our apartments in 2006, which, proved to be a good time. And we couldn't reinvest in Florida because the prices were too high. So we ended up in North Carolina, and that's sort of where we started. And so since then, not only do we own 45 communities now, I've also sold 42 communities since then. So it's been a pretty crazy period of time.
Wow. Good deal. Now, yeah, you answered my question, but I was going to ask, I didn't remember the answer of if you walked away unscathed from the crash of 2008, and it sounds like you got out just in the nick of time. So probably sold at the peak and was able to parlay that capital. Because back in 2006, nicer mobile home communities still carried a decent value to them, but nowhere near where they're at today, right? And so I'm assuming that you were exiting out of your apartments at, fairly low cap rates and able to parlay that capital into mobile home parks at a much higher yield just going in. So now that's awesome. But and so it's been 16 years, as you had mentioned. A lot's changed since then. I mean, even just in the past 5 years in the space, a lot has changed. And so, maybe kind of fill me in as to how your business has evolved, even just since we spoke last time, which again about 5 years ago. I know that you were probably about half the size at that point, and just being in this business, from the first park you'd mentioned, the one in Lakeland, 80 spaces, high density, literally stacked together like sardines in a can, to some of the nicer communities, 4+ star communities or 3.5+ star communities that have a much lower density. Folks actually have a yard that they can, go play in or do, put plants in, what have you. And your business has evolved over time. So maybe speak to that a little bit and some of the big changes that you've seen internally here over the last couple of years.
Sure. When we first started, we really took a leap of faith. I really didn't know what a mobile home park was. I'd probably seen them growing up, but I just didn't understand them. Then once we sort of got into it, and we're sort of that way, we study things, we make some decisions, and we just sort of take a leap of faith and figure if you buy it right, I always say you make your money at the purchase. If you buy it right, you can always get out of it if it doesn't work out for you and not take a significant hit. So we just did that. And the one thing that the biggest difference between then and now is financing. Then I was very fortunate to have a community bank relationship from some of the other businesses I was in. And that allowed me to buy a lot of communities, which, some of them we sold, some of them we went to CMBS. And obviously now Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have made the business so much better from a financing standpoint. So that's probably the number one thing. Back then, it was still considered trailer parks. Nobody really wanted them. Like you said, the 5-star, 4-star parks were great, but that was like more of an elite level. I didn't have the cash to do it back then. So we just sort of bought whatever we could and we pieced it together until we figured it out. Basically, what do we want to do? We made every mistake in the book. We basically bought one park based on, short-term rent-to-own contracts that, everyone basically fulfilled them. And so, the home rent went away and we're like, damn, our cash flow is way down from where it was. So we made that mistake, but we're able to get out of that park. And so it was everything, but you just got to keep grinding. And you look back on it in the last 10 years, especially, it's been a blur because we've probably done, 7 to 8, 9 deals a year. And you don't even know where the time goes.
Yeah, and I know that you're in 9 different states. What are your preferred markets? You started in Florida and then jumped up to North Carolina due to I guess better pricing, at least back then. And then but you've expanded. You've expanded your reach and your footprint over 9 different states. What are those preferred states that you like to buy in?
We got about right around 1,500 spaces in North Carolina, a little bit more maybe. We're pushing that in South Carolina now too. I like the Greenville market, Columbia market, Charleston's a good market too. And then we have about 1,700 spaces in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta for the most part on the outskirts. And that's been really good for us. And then we've moved in the last couple of years to the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so it's sort of a natural, but we got about 400 spaces in Wisconsin. We just got a nice big park, 250 space park in Indianapolis last year. And then some smattering of little parks here and there.
So we know that there's a limited supply of parks. I mean, that's one of the allures, I think, that bring people into the business. It creates a natural barrier to entry. However, it also creates its own internal challenges. I mean, there's a finite supply. Like there's only so many. I know that there are a few new developments that happen in any given year, but not enough to, I think, offset those that might get redeveloped or shut down, what have you. And so again, I don't think anyone really knows the real number of how many mobile home parks exist in the U.S. There's always that number kind of thrown around. There's somewhere between 45 and 50,000. Who knows if that's accurate or not? And the majority of those are probably small parks that really wouldn't have an interest to a larger buyer such as yourself. And so, with that being said, and here over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of new blood come into the space. Lots of new folks that wouldn't have had an interest years prior in mobile home parks now really jumping into space. Really, in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, I'm talking probably 5 times, increase as far as interest level in the space. So, talk to me about finding opportunities. For those that are maybe still considering the space, they might want to jump in. I mean, are there deals left? How are you guys finding opportunities? Have they getting, or is it getting tighter? Is the supply getting tighter of what's available out there? What have you?
Yeah, the supply is definitely getting tighter and the competition is way more intense. I think you got to go back for maybe 5 years ago at the most, but Dan and Dave from San Francisco, who are from Goldman, they got into Bloomberg Business Week, talking about how great the transition was to mobile home parks. And then Frank and Dave got in the New York Times, and all of a sudden it exploded. And then you saw, the private equity guys, Carlyle and Apollo, and all these guys have gotten into the business. In addition to what I'm really surprised about is how many young people are in the business now, trying to buy the parks. And I tell people, if you're newer to the business, you have a limited amount of capital, the opportunity is in that 40 to 90 space park. You're not going to run into the competition of the big boys because nobody really wants less than 100 if they don't have to. So that's, I think, where you start. And as you said, 40, 50,000 parks there, probably 80, 85% are below 100 spaces. So that's, I still think, where there's a lot of mom and pop owners who haven't kept up with the rents, who haven't been able to bring in new homes because they don't have the capital. That's where I think the opportunities are there. I'm thinking there's about a 5-year window left for all this stuff to really get consolidated. As we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, as you mentioned, the consolidation's been very active, and it's just going to get more so as the prices go up and the supply decreases.
Yeah. What's your long-term plan, my friend? Yeah. Once that happens and it really slows to a trickle of really tacking on additional communities to your portfolio, is it a set it and forget it, hold it for the long term, or is it a roll-up strategy and sell off to one of the big PE firms that are getting into our space?
That's a great question. I don't think about it a lot. You sort of just do what you do. Mm-hmm. In a lot of the parks we've had, especially the stuff in Raleigh and Charlotte with, those markets are booming, that, we'll probably keep those for the long term, I would imagine. We've really gotten to the point now where the portfolio is very manageable. We've gotten rid of any of the problems that we had, whether we had to buy portfolio parks and we ended up with a real, dud, or we got into a wastewater treatment plant situation in Maryland, which is very difficult. Especially with the Maryland Department of Environmental stuff up there. So we've gotten rid of all that. So it's a lot better than it was. And so it runs fairly smoothly now. We have fantastic managers. As I said, Chris Berry, my operations guy, has been with me for 20 years doing this. And then he was in the financial planning business as well. But for me, that has allowed us to grow because I focus on the acquisitions, the bigger picture stuff. He deals with all the day-to-day operation stuff. And the one thing I also tell, newer people in the business, you have to focus on the operations. They don't run by themselves. Mm-hmm. There's always issues. It never ends. Sort of, you think, hey, maybe I'm going to get away this week or next week without, major issues. It's just sort of the nature of the business.
Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here with Sunrise Capital Investors. As you are hopefully already well aware if you've been a listener for any period of time, my goal has always been to provide you with as much value as I possibly can through my 2 podcasts, Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow and the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. As our audience continues to grow, literally, we've been downloaded millions of times by folks in over 125 countries. I've had thousands of people reach out looking to get involved in our niche, and that's the phenomenal niche of mobile home park investing. Now, for those that don't know, I've been a full-time real estate investor for more than 20 years now, and I've personally invested in and have owned apartment complexes, various commercial properties, hundreds of single-family rentals, and I've interviewed some of the most successful investors in just about every other asset class, and I've arrived at this one very simple conclusion. Mobile home parks are hands down the best investment I've found to date. Why? They provide investors with the best risk-adjusted returns out of any other real estate sector that I've seen. Investing in real estate can get complicated, and I really want to simplify this process for you. If you're someone who wants to diversify away from the uncertainty of Wall Street and allocate a percentage of your real estate portfolio to mobile home parks, but maybe don't have the time nor the inclination to personally locate good deals yourself, then our team will do it for you. At Sunrise Capital Investors, our team specializes in the acquisitions and management of undervalued and highly profitable mobile home parks. And we are now providing accredited investors with an opportunity to participate directly alongside our team in Growth and Income Fund 3. When you invest in our fund, you get immediate diversification into multiple deals we acquired off-market that are already performing and have built-in sweat equity. And let me say this, I believe that we are hands down the best in our space at sourcing highly profitable off-market deals. That's really what makes us unique in this niche and as investment managers. As stewards of your capital, we truly are aligned with our investors. We've structured our investment fund so that we as a company are incentivized in the same way the investor is, which is through the performance of the investment itself. In addition, we want to make sure that we not only make money for our investors, but that they understand how it's being made. That's why we provide our accredited partners with a private monthly podcast that walks them through the detailed updates on how their investment is performing. And we're very transparent, providing you with the good, the bad, and the ugly at times. And so if you'd like to learn more about the partnership opportunities with our team here at Sunrise, please visit us at investwithsunrise.com and request access to the investor presentation. It's absolutely free, and you'll get instant access to review the off-market deals that we've already purchased that you can co-own with our team. Also, feel free to call us at 833-CASH-FLOW without the O. Again, that's 833-227-4359, and our investor relations team will help you schedule an appointment to speak with one of our managing principals. If you have questions, go ahead and schedule the call, and let's jump on the phone. And with that, guys, I'd like to leave with one last thought. From the time that I wake up in the morning till the time that I lay my head down the rest of the evening, my number one priority with everything I do, whether it be recording this podcast, working for our investors, helping each of you reach your investment goals, to providing a great experience to each of our residents who reside in our communities, is to add huge amounts of value to everyone that I come in contact with. Now, with that being said, I look forward to the opportunity of bringing value to you through Sunrise and through this podcast. Thank you for your time. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the show.
What do you think? I mean, if you had to pick like one or two of the biggest issues on the operations side that you see, or I guess mistakes that you see a lot of other operators make that maybe you guys made back in the day and you've learned from, and just where the cracks are, where things fall through the cracks on the op side. What are those one or two big things that just come to mind?
I think the private utilities is a big issue especially for us when we didn't really know what we were getting into. I don't think we did the proper due diligence back in the day in a couple of those properties that we had, so it caused problems. One thing I'll say at everything that I've encountered on the mobile home park side is that everything's fixable, but at a certain price, obviously. And the only thing that gets really expensive are, the wastewater treatment plants or the septics, being too close together. Then you got to build a wastewater treatment plant. That can throw your whole plan into a loop. So I advise people when they're first starting out, try to get public utilities. It's just a little bit easier. Wait till you're get a little more experience before you start dipping into private utilities. On the other hand, we've gotten some great opportunities with private, a couple of our bigger parks are private utilities on one aspect or another. And, those have been fantastic deals too. But so that to me is the biggest issue. Everything else, roads, fixing leaks, the residents are pretty good. I think the difference in the business also in the last few years is after 08, 09, before that, I estimate that about 25% of the population was suitable for a mobile home park, income-wise and things like that. Since 08, 09, when, the bottom half of the country got devastated, I think it's 50% now. 50% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford a whole lot else. They've, struggled with their credit and whatever. And that's made, the perfect scenario for us. The demand for affordable housing in the big metro areas where we're at is through the roof. And the supply, as you mentioned, is gradually shrinking on all aspects. So it's a good situation.
Yeah, and one of the other things I think as this business evolves, that's been the big change. I mean, that negative stigma has gone away, and I think part of the negative stigma of living in a mobile home was just the overall quality of that mobile home. Now, I know 10 years ago you could pay for a high quality mobile home, but now it's becoming a little bit more the norm. Even like the lower end builder grade, they're nice. I mean, they're starting to use some of the fits and finishes, even the low end stuff of a normal stick built house. And then you could surely, get middle of the road stuff that's got drywall throughout. It very much looks and feels like a traditional home at a fraction of the price. And then once you're in, once you fall into that camp, your other options either live in a newer, nice mobile home or a brand new Class A apartment that probably is $400 or $500 more per month. I mean, and really. Yeah. you get the same experience in one versus the other. One, they probably use the same type of finishes, what have you. And I don't think a lot of, I mean, the folks that might not be considering a mobile home today that are in that demographic that it would serve well, they still just don't know. They don't realize that there are incredibly nice mobile homes that you can live in. And like in a market like a Raleigh, I don't know what you guys are getting for if it's like a rent to own or a rental unit. I'm guessing probably what, $1,200 a month for a single wide, like a newer, nicer single wide. Is that?
Yeah, it's between over 1,000 to 1,200.
Which a Class A in that same market would be what, 1,600 to 1,800 probably?
Yeah, it's definitely pushing 18 plus.
Yeah. Interesting. So as far as like the improvements that when you guys buy a community, the improvements that you have found over time that have the highest return on investment, what are they? Just what are the big ones that come to mind? Well,
I think the first thing is just you got to get rid of all the bad characters. If it was a park that was really mismanaged, we don't run into that quite as much as we did in, the early years. There were a lot of really mismanaged parks. Mm-hmm. So getting rid of, the bad characters because there weren't background checks and stuff like that. I think the number one thing is getting rid of the old homes and bringing in the new homes is your best bang for your buck. You're going to get a better residence. The park looks better. And when you run the cash on cash numbers of bringing in a new home, even though bringing in new homes gotten a lot more expensive too. I mean, it feels to me like the cost has almost doubled over the last, probably 12, 15 years with the setup costs and everything being more expensive, but it's still well worth your money. So I think that's number one. And number two is paving the roads. It's not that expensive, but it makes the park look so much better. And if you can do that right up front, budget the money, pave the roads, the bottom line is you want to keep the residents, and the less turnover means the more money. I would say the third thing that's really a cheap thing to do, maybe cost you a couple $100, is every park we have is hooked up with a charity, whether it be a religious charity or, a local food drive or food bank or whatever it may be. And that really adds a lot of value for a little bit of money that, once a month they're bringing in boxes of food to people, which really blew me away that, a lot of the residents are deciding between paying for their medicine and food by the last week of the month, which is disturbing, and it's sort of the result of 0809 when a lot, the middle class has sort of disappeared. And, you got a lot of, more of a, unfortunately, a lower class in America. So I would recommend that. Just reach out to your Boys and Girls Club, your local church. They're all willing to help. They do a great job. They'll, host your, spring fling where you get a bouncy house and a DJ and pizza, just little things like that help out. And obviously now during COVID, we found that the charities have been very helpful for people who are struggling, maybe because they're unemployed or whatever, and to provide them some rent assistance. It's been a good thing all over the place.
No, that's amazing. I love that idea. Just connecting with the local charity. So each one of your communities, and you've got a dedicated charity that you work with. I love that.
Yeah, it works good.
So speaking to the used homes versus the new home, I feel like that is the forever debate, when looking at a community. And I think that's the one thing that I think a lot of folks become undecided about. So I'd like to dissect that a little deeper, and really come to a conclusion, at least a conclusion based on why you guys make the decision to go new versus maybe, quality used home, that's maybe half the price. Right. And so if you, in the markets where you currently are, if you could, if you're buying, let's say that new single wide is, let's call it $50,000 all in. But you could find you could find quality used homes, vinyl sided, shingle roof, maybe, 15 years old, something like, somewhere between 10 and 15 years old for, call it 25. What is the benefit of buying the new home versus that used?
For me, and for us, we went through that whole used home thing for a lot of years, especially when we started out. It was always cheaper to keep the used home. Now, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, we went to the rule, basically, if it's anything pre-1998, we'll probably bump that up a year or two, but especially if it's not vinyl shingle and it's in the park, it's an old, 70s home or whatever. As soon as somebody comes out of it, we get rid of it and bring in a new one. I just think the value you're going to get in the long term by having new houses is way better. And the problem we had with the older houses, no matter how they looked on the outside, is that they never seemed to get repaired enough to make people happy. Mm-hmm. And you were constantly turning over that unit. So you'd get somebody in there for a year, 18 months, they were unhappy, because it just, again, it wasn't new. But the new ones we had, again, they're, as you were saying, they're made a lot better. The structure is more quality, and they look great when you can't in any market right now in the Southeast and Midwest, you get a new home on there and it's gone within a couple of weeks for sure. So I just, as we've gotten bigger, we went to the thing that we don't have time to fix up these older homes and constantly turn them over.
Yep.
Again, when we started, it was different because the money was tighter. So we did that. But now if you're thinking longer term, 5, 10, 15 years out, and especially with the cash program and some of these other things, that you're able to finance the home and, put down just the set costs, I think it's a no-brainer in our mind that you go with the new home.
No, I agree. I mean, just the peace of mind of not having to deal with the mechanicals for a period of time. Yes. HVAC systems, plumbing, the roof. Hopefully, the roof lasts you get 15 years out of it. Depending on what state you're in. But I mean, just generally speaking, the big ticket items that cause you to, number one, have a maintenance, a heavy maintenance park, and then also to turn units or, to turn tenants over on a regular basis. No, I agree with you there. Especially if you're getting a park that's got, very rarely, if you're buying a park that's got some distress to it, those units have probably been neglected and haven't been fixed right ever. Right? Like the repair. Yeah, right. The repairs have never been done 100%. It's always, there's a little bit of Band-Aid here, a little bit of Band-Aid there. And inevitably, that stuff adds up over time. And at some point, it's just, it's easier to pull the trigger. It makes more sense to pull the trigger on a brand new home and not have to worry about that. So no, I agree with you there. And then, I'd love to chat about the pandemic again. As I'd mentioned before we started the show here, I'm kind of sick of talking about the pandemic, but it's real. It's here. It's not going away anytime soon. And, I know you're back in I guess end of March going into April, you probably lost sleep like I did, got a couple extra gray hairs thinking that, the tenants weren't going to pay. And then same thing happened at the end of April after they did pay in April. At the end of April, kind of rolling in May. Well, maybe this is the month it's going to happen. Like everything's going to hit the fan. And, that really hasn't played out. We've had, our various, some communities, we've had a higher uptick than others, what have you. But generally speaking, it is not near the severity, not even close to the severity of what everyone thought it was going to be. And so, are there any major changes that you guys had made within your business to better adapt to the pandemic and to some of the challenges your residents are facing? And just what are some of the big changes that have happened over the past 7, 8, 9 months within your business because of the pandemic?
Well, like you were saying, I was nervous going in April. You didn't know what to expect. It was a completely unknown situation. And we were pleasantly surprised. I mean, we really haven't missed a beat any month. We were talking before, we're having a little more difficulty in a couple of counties in Florida where we're at, where it's hard to get an eviction filed. We're able to, in North Carolina, South Carolina, do non-renewal of lease and been able to get those, even though they take a little bit longer, we've been able to get a couple through. And I think really it's just, we don't do a lot of evictions, even on, with 6,000 spaces. It's more just the tool to have in your arsenal that you can say, hey, we'll work with you, but if you don't come through for what you said, we're going to have to evict you. But so that's been, not really having that tool in the arsenal has been difficult in a couple of cases, but by and far, most people have paid. We were real strong, 99% plus all the way through. We may have dipped 1 or 2% on a couple months, but for the most part, it's been really good for us. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a situation where the reason we all got into this business in the first place is, mobile home parks do well in the good times. Obviously now more than, after 2008, 2009, they continue to have waiting lists and stuff. But in the bad times is when really why we all got into the business, the so-called recession proof. And obviously this is testing that theory pretty well. And I think it's held up really well in a period of time, because really if they don't pay their lot rent and they get an eviction on the record at some point in time, even if it's 6, 12 months down the road, they're screwed. I mean, they're not going anywhere. So I think that's why people have kept paying and they want to keep their house. And it goes back to what you're saying. If you have newer houses, if you have a nicer community, people don't want to leave. They don't want to get kicked out and have to move their families. And as you know, we got a lot of families there, and with 3 or 4 bedroom units with no neighbor on top of you or on the side of you. You got a little lawn. A lot of the parks we have now have pools and rec areas and stuff like that. It's tough to beat for lot rent at $400. And we do it a little bit differently on the rent to owns. We try to more sell them for cost. So we're typically at $850 to $895. Which is low, but we just want to get people to be owners. We really don't want to make any money in the homes. For me, it's all about the lot rent. If we can keep that lot rent higher, that's the name of the game. So, Yeah, it's really been surprising to me that it's worked out. I think going forward here that, we're definitely not out of the woods with these variants coming around and stuff. I think we probably got one more surge ahead of us till the vaccine sort of catch up with everything and this starts to mediate. But I was, listening to an interview with the CEO of Moderna the other day, and he said it's never going away. It's going to be with us all the time. It's probably going to be the new flu, which is, a little bit disturbing because it's obviously much more serious than just a regular.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I want to, there's a couple questions I definitely want to hit back on before I moved on away from like, bringing in new homes, what have you. And you just kind of brought it back up and it spurred my memory as far as how you guys manage those new homes that you bring in. And, in a perfect world, you bring a home in and there's a cash buyer lining up with whatever, $50,000 ready to hand that over. Or they've got their own financing that they went to the bank and got. We know that those are few and far between, right?
Yes.
Every once in a while you get one and it makes you really happy, makes you smile. But again, a rare case indeed. But do you guys typically do straight rentals or do you do rent-owns? I know you said you want them to be the homeowner, so I'm assuming you go more the rent-to-own route. And so with that, what does that structure typically look like? How long does it normally take a homeowner, I guess assuming it's a brand new home, how long does it take them to get from the path of, just moving into actual home ownership?
Well, it depends what type of house. If we're doing a single wide, we try to do it in 10 years. If we're doing a double wide, it's more like 12 or 13 years.
Okay.
Again, so we're trying to keep the costs for them low enough where, $895, if they went to rental anywhere, even a house or anything, they're looking at probably $1,250 to $1,500, even in a not great area in Raleigh, Charlotte, or Atlanta, or whatever. So our cost comparison is really well. And what we want to do is try to keep that resident in there and try to fulfill the 10-year contract. Our experience has been that rarely happens. Usually you have 2 owners or 3 owners, every 3 years people leave for whatever reason. They can't manage their finances. They move for jobs, whatever it may be. So, it doesn't always happen that way, but we figured by the 8th, 9th, 10th year, we're able to sell that home for, $5,000 to somebody. People have $5,000, but like you say, they don't have 50. In very rare cases, they do. A couple parks, we've been fortunate that it's worked out well, but in the vast majority, they don't have the money. So we're trying to keep their costs low and keep that term as short as possible to get them to be owners. And we put the lot rent a little bit higher than, say the lot rent's $400, we'll probably put them at $425, and we're not going to bump their lot rent, until they're, through their contract. So it'll sort of catch up at a period of time. But
how do you make,
I think it's a great deal for people.
Yeah. How do you make the decision single wide versus double wide? What really turns you from one to the other? I mean, double wide, you've got so many additional costs. You got a higher cost of unit, you got a higher cost of delivery and setup, what have you. But how do you guys make that determination of which one goes in which community?
The vast majority of the time, we're going with the 16 by 76, the single wide, a little bit bigger. We use Clayton, obviously. We've always been there, so it's been easy for us. But the last couple of years, we've been sprinkling double wides in our better parks. I just think it makes the park look better. Talk about demand. You get a double wide and, you got 10 people wanting that in a matter of minutes. Economically, it doesn't make as much sense. The single wide's definitely a better way to go. But just for a longer term perspective and more of a park aesthetic viewpoint, I think having a few double wides mixed in, especially at the front of a park, just makes it look nicer.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Absolutely. Now, I know that, switching gears a little bit, most folks talk about all the great deals that they've done over the years, all the money that they've made. And we know that, and you've already alluded to it a little bit, that there's challenges. You had some challenges in the beginning. You bought a few dogs and maybe it was part of a portfolio sale, a few duds that came along with it, or had some challenges with some private utility situations that you weren't really, prepared for, didn't have the knowledge, the knowledge base to deal with. And so I guess what's the one that comes to mind, the most challenging deal in the mobile home park space? So I know that you've done other stuff in the apartment world, but most challenging deal that comes to mind, what was the challenge, and ultimately how did you guys overcome it?
The most challenging deal we had was we bought a park in a suburb of Chicago, and it was probably 120 spaces, mostly older homes. We got a great price on it, but we really didn't know enough back then to do proper due diligence. It's probably 7-8 years ago. and the park was a sieve. The water leaks were just horrific. And, when it would freeze up there, you just have, new lakes, reoccurring in your park, which you didn't really want. And we had that park for 2 years. And the biggest negative was it took so much of Chris, my operations guy's time. He was up there all the time, trying to stay on top of it and things like that. And if we would have just tested the pipes in the beginning, we would have backed out of the deal, obviously, because it was very readily known. We just, didn't do that. We didn't understand that. It was such a great deal. We actually sold it 2 years later and made a little money on it. Maybe $100,000 on it, but I was so happy to get out of it that it was just one of those situations where you're just hoping. It cash flowed pretty much every month, a little bit, not great, but the time commitment made it a total dog. And the fact that we got out of it was just sort of a miracle, actually. And one of the things I tell people now is be very careful about California is difficult. Illinois is very difficult. The Northeast, you're starting to get the rent control issues, where the governments are much more involved. I mean, still in Chicago, our annual licensing fee for that park was $5,000.
Wow.
Normally it's $100 or $200 or whatever. $5,000. We had to pay some money under the table with the alderman to keep things going. I mean, it was ridiculous. This was like 2013, 2014. And it was just, one of those headaches. It was one of the best days of Chris's life for sure, getting rid of that park. And because we also had some violence issues there too, which, it was just the part of the neighborhood, part of the time, things like that. So
I think I remember that deal. I feel like I've talked with you about that before. Was that the Calumet City? Is that how you pronounce that? Is that it?
Bring up that nightmare for me. I got a little PTSD from that deal. So yes,
that's funny.
Correct.
Well, we just sold R2 that fit that profile, and not from a standpoint of old homes, but they were two parks we had up in New York State, gorgeous communities in Buffalo. I mean, one was a 4-star, the other was pretty close to a 4-star. Very, very nice communities. But the political climate there and doing business, the challenges associated with doing business, and I don't want to be too derogatory here, but it's a very different mindset with the tenant base and dealing with them. And so luckily we found a great buyer. He owns like 20 parks up there. And so like he's very ingrained in New York and everything about New York. And he's used to doing business there, but the difficulties just, they weren't worth it. It's just, life is too short to deal with that amount of challenges, especially. And these weren't dogs; these were really nice communities. And God, we literally just closed, I think December 23rd on those, and so just a very short time ago, and it was probably one of the happiest days of my mobile home park life.
It's weird how different parts of the country are so different. And the reason we stick to the Southeast and the Midwest is just because it's easier to do business. And again, the Midwest, I would never buy a park again in Illinois. I think the state's bankrupt. I think taxes are going to get way worse than they are now. But if you live in Illinois and you're there and you can stay on top of the issues and some of the local politicians, it makes it a lot easier. Like you're saying with your buyer in New York. It's just from out of state standpoint, from North Carolina, trying to navigate those environments is very difficult.
Well, with Illinois, I know that they've been teetering. I mean, it's been a threat for a long time, rent control, for mobile home parks. I know that they've got a very active association, which I think's been able to kind of keep it at bay. But I think it's inevitable. Well, we'll see. We'll see if this new legislation. I wish this on no one, but if there's another state or a next state to implement rent control, it's probably going to be Illinois more than likely. I know you own up in Maryland as well. We do as well. And I know their neighboring state, Delaware, they've got rent control in Delaware. Maryland does not have it at this point in time. Is that a concern of yours in the state of Maryland as far as, expanding your portfolio there?
We actually sold our 2 parks in Maryland last year. And that was one of the reasons. It feels to me, they have a Republican governor up there, so things were pretty good, but they're much tighter environmentally too. We had that issue with that park as far as the wastewater treatment plant, constantly redoing things, and they'd come in and say, well, this isn't good enough, you got to do this, and they were like changing, moving the goalposts on us all the time. But I feel like rent control is coming there at some stage of the game. And last year, actually the year before, more 2019 into early 2020, I spent a fair amount of time looking at parks in California. I like the market and whatever. I don't know how you can do it with rent control at 2%, 2.5%.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, to me, nothing made sense. I would run the numbers. I'm like, you just can't do it right now. If you're trying to buy a distressed park and you can only raise the rents 2%, it just doesn't work. And so I've just stuck to the easier stuff that we know, which is the Southeast, and a couple, Wisconsin and Indiana have been great, states to operate in.
I see you guys aren't in Texas yet. Why not?
It's just, everyone asks me that because there's so many great parks there. It's just a little far for me to travel. And, it sounds lazy on my part, but it's just, it's a couple, 2.5 hours or so. It just hasn't been there. We've had enough parks around us that it's just sort of been easy. We know our markets. I would tell people to, pick 2 or 3 markets you really like. Yeah, obviously the closer to home, the better initially. But it doesn't have to be that way. But it's just easier to manage when stuff is there. And, from the standpoint of family life and everything else, we just didn't want anything too far away. And that was a big reason why we didn't go to California too. It was just too much.
That's far. Yeah, that's really far. I mean, you talk about across the country there.
Yeah.
Lots of parks in California. I think that is the number one state as far as the number of communities. I think maybe Florida or Texas probably being second to that. Mike, what advice would you give to new folks looking to get into the space? Now, again, we talked about a lot of new blood coming into the space. I mean, what words of wisdom would you give those that are just looking to dabble and get in and get their feet wet?
Well, number one is, I told them the way we did it is we sort of sold our way up. We bought whatever we could, a lot of dogs, fixed them up a little bit and sold them. I don't know if you could do that. What really changed my view of the business was, in 2015 or 16, I sat down with Matt Follett, who's still in the business, been in the business since the early 80s. And he said to me, he's like, now is the time to get rid of your C properties and buy, many, in our business, 3.5 star, maybe a 4-star park if possible, and get rid of that stuff and go to quality. And that really changed my life because that's what we started to do. We exited all our sort of crappy parks that just didn't look that great, had some issues, and we moved into much nicer parks. The difference is I started to raise some money, and like you've had a couple funds. And the one thing I tell new people is you need money right now. You can't come in here and sort of shoestring these parks. Maybe you'll get away with one small one. You need to know how to legally raise money like you guys do. And I know you guys talk about a lot in your mentoring program. I just think that you really need to have the knowledge. The money is so readily available right now that people are just dying for a place to get, a little bit of return plus upside. You probably get away with 6% now. We're paying people 8% just because I only have a handful of investors and most of them are my friends. But I know like Eli at Boa Vita Group, so I'm down to 5% plus upside. So the demand for yield is huge. You can find the money, but you just need to take a course or go with somebody like you guys to really teach them how to raise that money, because I think even the 50 space parks are getting expensive now. They're $1.5 million, $2 million. It's not like the old days where you're going to pick them up for 15,000 a space or whatever. Maybe you can still do that in certain situations, but you really got to look hard. So money raising. And then the other thing is, pick your niche. Where are you going to be? You're going to be all over the country. Maybe you have to be now. I'm a little out of touch with that because we're not there. Maybe to get the deals, you really got to broaden your horizons because they are very doable from a long distance standpoint. I was very naive to that at the beginning and didn't think they were, but they're definitely are with technology now. So those are the 2 things I would recommend. And as part of that niche is, where you're going to be. And again, the 50 to 100 space park, I think that's where the most value is. I still buy a lot of distressed stuff. That's how we came into the business. I don't like the coupon clipping, 4.5 cap deals where there's very little upside. I just avoid. I don't care how nice the park is. A lot of stuff can still go wrong. So yeah. I want stuff with lower rents in the market and, some spaces to fill to build up the cash flow.
Yeah. And when you speak to distress, I mean, give me the expanded definition of what that really means to your group. You mentioned, lot rents below market, but what are some of the other big items that ultimately you see as opportunity that, could scare others away? Everyone's got their different definition of distress. What is it for you guys?
Hey, for us, really, right, it's the 2 things right now. Our definition of distress 10 years ago was a lot different. We bought anything we could get our hands on. Yeah. And there were some ugly deals, believe me, that, the one park that we had up in just north of Greensboro, and it worked well. Jimmy, who bought it, ended up selling it and made some money on it too. But they had those big lagoon type, wastewater treatment plants, and those, they just look ugly. I mean, I don't know how that water gets clean, but it's just something like that, just doesn't. So we bought that because we got super cheap. We got part of the portfolio. You build it up, and after a couple of years, sell it. Now for me, I'm looking for a quality park. It's really a solid 3-star park, but it's a mom and pop park where they've kept rents low because they're afraid of, the people leaving, which they're not going anywhere. And also there's, 15 to 25 spaces that can be filled with new homes. They just don't have the capital. I would say those are very difficult to find. If I can get 1 or 2 a year, I'm super happy.
Yeah.
But they're real difficult to find.
Well, Mike, it's always fun having you, buddy. It's good catching up with you. We'll have to make it not 5 years again next time around. For those that want to learn more about you and what you guys got going on, where's the best place to reach you as far as website wise?
Our website is not always updated. I need to do a better job of that, but it's acgmhc.com is where our website's at. And then you can also go to mikeconlon.com. I got some stuff about me out there too, and things like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're right. I looked at your Mike Conlon website and I had to get your bio updated. You're just like I need to update mine as well. So that's fair enough. We have busier or more things to do with our lives than update our website every day. With that being said, my friend, I appreciate you coming on. Always a lot of fun having you here, bud.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Alrighty, guys, that's all we have for this week's show. So until we meet again next week, this is your host, Kevin Buck, wishing you huge success. You guys take care.
Congratulations! Now you've got more of the best tricks of the trade in building massive amounts of passive income from real estate. For more amazing resources, visit realestateinvestingforcashflow.com. And we'll see you next Monday morning.